Hello everyone, and welcome to my first attempt at building an N Gauge wagon kit. I found this PECO Confat wagon at my local railway shop for a £5, and I thought maybe it would be fun to put it together. I've never made one before, but how hard can it be? Let's get started. Even though I've made loads of plastic model kits over the years, I've always shied away from railway kits. I'm not really sure why. I think maybe because there's this functional aspect to them I found a little bit daunting, but once you look at the contents of the kit, this wagon is super simple. There's like 5 bits we have to glue together, and then in that little bag there's some wheels and the couplings, and there's some handy dandy instructions too, so hopefully it should be a straightforward process. So this may be somewhat of a controversial tactic, but I like to paint my models as much as possible before gluing them together. It's a little fiddly to do it this way, but I find it easier to get everything painted, and particularly with this wagon where each piece represents a different colour, so I'm going to colour the body, the roof, the chassis separately. I don't have to worry about getting a neat line between them. So we can begin painting the model in its constituent parts. I'm painting the chassis black. I know that it's already in black plastic, but this way the glossiness and the texture should match better to the rest of the parts. I'm actually painting it with a black primer. It's Vallejo black primer. For the bit above the chassis, I don't really know what it's called, but this part I'm painting grey, and you can see how bad the coverage is on this paint. This is a Citadel paint. Again, I've watered it down, and it's just going to take Brazilian coats to get it done, but patience is the key here. For the body, I've chosen a relatively light reddish brown. Again, this is a Citadel colour. I know it looks a little bit orange, but because I like to go heavy on the weathering, I want to start with quite bright colours so that once they're toned down with washes and powders, I'll still have an interesting looking model and it won't just be like a dark grey mess. For the roof, I'm using another Citadel colour. I actually quite liked the colour the roof was already, so I just picked a grey out of my collection that matched the plastic relatively well. And yeah, just got it painted up so that it matched the rest in terms of the texture. So I know this doesn't translate to the most streamlined video, but I kind of wanted to show the process. What I've been doing is actually putting one coat on each part, so going lower chassis in black, the upper chassis grey, body red, roof grey, and running through each part so that by the time I've painted one part, the next one is dry, so I can make progress relatively quickly, because otherwise this would take forever. Here you can see I'm finishing up the lower chassis, the grey part. This one probably took the most coats because I was going from a very dark colour to quite a light colour, but you can see now it looks relatively smooth. It's not perfect, but because I'm going to be weathering the wagon very heavily, I don't actually need a perfect paint job. The thing I'm really just trying to avoid is brush stroke marks, so if the colour's got a little bit of variation in it, to be honest, it's probably a good thing. So here you can see me finishing up the body. Very pleased with the colour I picked. I think it's going to weather down nicely, and even though the paint didn't want to stick to the plastic at the start, now that I've put on 5 or 6 coats, it's looking reasonably smooth. And here's the roof. So this one was probably the easiest to paint because there wasn't a lot of difference between the grey I was using and the grey of the plastic, and also I think it's called Eschen grey from Citadel that I was using is what they call a base colour, so it's supposed to be almost like a primer. It's got a lot more coverage, so this one was nice and easy. So there we go, all the parts are painted. I think considering it's a brush job, everything looks pretty good. I know you can see a whole lot of brush strokes on the light grey chassis, but that's all going to be hidden within the body, so that's fine. And looking at the colours here, I think they're going to go pretty well together. I've been working from a couple of reference images. Always with wagons I find it's really hard to find good reference images, because if you Google wagons you just tend to get pictures of model kits, so I found one I liked and I've been working to that, and yeah, I'm pleased with the colours. So now let's move on to assembly. So the first thing we're going to do is attach this metal weight plate. The instructions say to not glue this, but I decided to go off piste here because I'm a smart man and I don't need to follow instructions. Well, it turns out I'm not a smart man and I should have followed the instructions. We'll cover this one later, but rest assured this came back to bite me in the butt. Don't do this. The next stage is to add the couplings. These simply drop into little slots on either end of the chassis. Nice and simple. This is a clever little design, I like it. So to attach the light grey chassis part to the black chassis part, the kit includes these little guys. I haven't seen nuts these small since I accidentally caught my reflection in a duck pond in the late 90s. I don't see a reason why I would ever need to take the chassis apart. I've already glued that weight plate in, so I'm not going to bother using these things. I'm just going to glue everything together. So remember I said we shouldn't have glued on the weight plate? Well, this is where it came back to bite me. Turns out I didn't glue the plate in exactly the right place, so now my grey chassis part won't fit. It's pretty poor design on behalf of the kit that it's possible to put it in the wrong place, but hey ho, we soldier on. I removed some material from the grey part with a scalpel, and that allows me to fit everything in place. Fortunately, it's not an area you can see, so it's fine and it won't affect the look of the model or the function. Once that's done, I put some super glue on the posts where the nuts would have gone, and that secures everything in place. So to fit the wheels, they are a push fit. The little axle box bits with the suspension, you basically just kind of bend those slightly as you're fitting the wheels. It doesn't feel like you're bending it too far though. It was super easy to do. After the wheels are in, the last couple of things to cover off are the body and the roof. This is very straightforward, nothing to report. I just used a couple of dabs of super glue and we're good to go. So that's all the assembly done. It was a very simple and enjoyable process. Even though I would say the kit could do with being a little bit more idiot-proof, it is reasonably well designed for the most part. And already I think we have something that looks reasonably good, if I may say so myself. One extra little bit of detail I would like to add is in some of the reference pictures I've seen, the little bracket things going around the chassis are black. So I'm going to pick those out with a tiny little brush. I think it adds a nice bit of colour to the model and makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. So all the reference pictures I've seen of these wagons include lettering of some description. So I purchased this transfer sheet from Fox Transfers to achieve this effect. I really wasn't prepared for how tiny these things were going to be. So, spoiler alert, but I did make a bit of a mess of these transfers. Normally I'm pretty good with them, but these ones were just way too small for me. Not sure if it's a skill issue or if maybe my process isn't quite right, but this is a heads up to take what I've done here with a big pinch of salt. To place these transfer, I brush on a small amount of Mr. Mark's decal softener. Then put the transfer on top of that and use a cotton bud in a rolling motion to remove the excess fluid. After that, I brush on a little bit of decal setter, again from Mr. Mark, and roll that off with a cotton bud. The issue I was having was the setter seemed to lift the transfers up off the model, which I haven't had happen before. Unfortunately, it made my British Railways lettering a little bit wonky. But anyway, I gave it a couple goes, and once I had something which didn't look too terrible, I sealed everything in by brushing on a couple of coats of matte varnish. So as you can see, most of the transfers went on reasonably well, but yeah, the main one is a little wonky. Also, I have really no idea if the decals are in realistic places or even correct for this wagon. I just vaguely matched them by their sort of shape to some reference images. As you guys can probably tell by everything I've done, I'm not bothered at all by realism. But if you're having a bad day, if the cat took a massive shit in your bed this morning, or you're just bored, feel free to get angry at me in the comments because I put my transfers in the wrong place. So now for my favourite part, the weathering. We are going to start with an all-over oil wash and basically make a huge mess of the model. Once I have applied enough wash to make me think I've probably ruined everything, I then use a cotton bud to remove most of the wash. That leaves the colour in the nooks and crannies and also gives some nice colour variation, and it brings out the detail. After the wash, I apply a darkish brown weathering powder with an old brush to simulate a layer of dirt. I'm focusing the powder mostly around the base of the wagon as much as possible. And I'm also applying it before the wash is fully cured, maybe giving it 10 or 15 minutes to kind of set. But if the wash is still a little bit tacky, then I find the powder adheres a little bit better. For the roof, I'm using an oil brusher from MIG. For some strange reason, it's called Starship Bay Sludge. Not sure who names the colours at MIG, but I'll presume it was a Friday afternoon when this one came up, and that person was in a hurry to get to the pub. Anyway, I dab the Starship Bay Sludge on the roof, and give it a little bit of time to go tacky. Then I'm going to drag it sideways across the model to form some subtle streaks, looking like the dirt's kind of run down off the edge of the roof. So after that was all done, I did go back and neaten things up a little bit with a cotton bud. The weathering was too heavy even for my taste, so I've just brought it back a tad. But that is the nice thing about using oil washes and weathering powders, is that you can come back and basically take it all off if you wanted to. So considering it's my first wagon kit, I'm pretty happy. I like the colour choices and I'm glad to have a new type of wagon in my fleet. I think it blends in nicely with the other ones now that it's weathered and it doesn't really stand out as being built from a kit. In terms of decals, yeah, they're not ideal, but the close-up pictures are pretty brutal. Remember how tiny these wagons are. In person, it really isn't that noticeable that the lettering isn't quite straight. So yeah, for a £5 from my local model shop, I got a nice evening building the wagon, spent a good few hours on it, and now I have another piece of rolling stock to run on my layout. So with that said, thanks everyone for watching, appreciate all the support, I'll catch you next time.